Hills fam, thanks for joining us for this week's online teaching. Don't forget, next Sunday is our 5th Sunday meal. In lieu of our normal service at Hallett, we will still be at Hallett, but we encourage you to bring a dish to share. We will break bread together and get to know one another. So that is next Sunday, 10 a.m. at Hallett. Can you remember a time when you were overcome with fear? Like something happened and you legit, it was instantaneous. It was fear. A few years ago, actually it's more than a few years ago now, when the boys were young, they were about 2 and 5, we were living in the mountains. And this is back when they were, still cute and chunky. But there was this barbecue event in Frisco that we would go to every summer. And in the main street in Frisco, it would just be vendor after vendor, barbecue events, music, just all kinds of fun happening. And it was tight quarters. It was like shoulder to shoulder kind of event. And they'd always have these pig races, which was a family highlight. And so this one year, and the boys, they were little. We stopped in to watch the pig races, and the pigs were numbered, and they had different colored jacket on, so you could, before the race, I'm going for number 3. I'm going for that little pig, look like it's going. And they were really more like piglets. They were small, but anyway, so we stopped by the pig races, and we watched the race, and we cheered, "Go pig, go piggy!" I don't know what we cheered. After the race, we get ready to leave, and we look down, and Britt, the 2-year-old, is missing. He is gone. He was a bit of a wandering child, and in that moment, it's just pure chaos. We're searching frantically. We're looking for him. Elora and I split up. She goes one direction, I go the other direction, and it seems like just time has slowed down. And it probably was only 5 minutes. We did find Britt, in case you were didn't know what happened, but we found Britt. He had a crowd had gathered around him. They had realized he was alone, and we're looking out for him, and so we found him. But in that moment, it's just all these thoughts and ideas of what might have happened to him and where he could have gone if someone took him, or just what kind of parent you are. All these things are just flooding through your mind, all in that moment. And in today's passage in Luke chapter 2, Mary and Joseph have a similar moment. Jesus isn't 2, he's 12, but still, when they realize that Jesus is missing, I just can't imagine. So as you listen to Luke chapter 2, we're going to hear it from Streetlights Audio Bible. Put yourself in Mary's sandals as you listen.
Every year, Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem for the Passover festival. When Jesus was 12 years old, they attended the festival as usual. After the celebration was over, they started home to Nazareth, but Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. His parents didn't miss him at first because they assumed he was among the other travelers. But when he didn't show up that evening, they started looking for him among their relatives and friends. When they couldn't find him, they went back to Jerusalem to search for him there. 3 days later, they finally discovered him in the temple, sitting among the religious teachers, listening to them and asking questions. All who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. His parents didn't know what to think.
"Son,"
his mother said to him,
"why have you done this to us? Your father and I have been frantic, searching for you everywhere."
But why did you need to search?
He asked.
Didn't you know that I must be in my father's house?
But they didn't understand what he meant. Then he returned to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them. And his mother stored all these things in her heart. Jesus grew in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and all the people.
Only thing we know about Jesus from the time he was a baby to the time that he was 30 and starting his public ministry. I mean, we know a little bit about like those first months and the first year about the shepherds and the manger and going to the temple and dedication. We know from the Gospel of Matthew that his parents, they fled into Egypt with him when he was just a baby, and then they came back. But really, all we know of Jesus in his growing up years is what you just heard, Jesus in the temple. Now personally, I have some questions about Jesus' growing up years, and maybe one day we'll find out. But like, did Jesus did he have acne? Right? Was he like every other teenager going through those hormones and things? How was it for Jesus' brothers and sisters? Like, you have this older brother who is literally perfect. He makes no mistakes. He never messes up. Where Mary and Joseph sometimes like to the younger ones, like, why can't you be more like Jesus? And what kind of resentment might that have caused, right? But a couple months ago, I met this guy at the rec center, and I see him up there on occasion. He knows I'm a pastor, and so one day he asked me, he's like, have we figured out what Jesus was up to for those 30 years? And I was like, well, no, we haven't figured out, and anything beyond what we have here in Scripture, it's all speculation. Anything else that you might read, it's from hundreds of years later, and not from the time of Jesus. And so then, like, he asked me that question. I was like, that's an interesting question. And then later that week, he texted me a link to a YouTube video. And on the YouTube video, this guy gave all kinds of background to what Jesus was doing. Apparently, Jesus went to Egypt, not when he was a baby, but when he was older than 12. And what he said was, in the video, he went to Egypt to learn the mysteries from Thoth the Atlantean. Yes, and then he went to Tibet to learn Reiki, and then to India to learn the mystic arts. Now, there is not one shred of evidence to support any of that. Even biblical scholars who are not believers, who are atheists, because there are atheists and agnostics who are legitimate biblical scholars, study the early languages, study the history. None of them would even go along with this, and so we are left with just this one passage from Jesus' growing up years. And what we see in this passage, it's short, but I think there are some things from us to learn in this passage. But we can see, and we mentioned this last week, is that Jesus grew up in a faithful Jewish home. So Luke 2:41 says, every year Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of the Passover. Mary and Joseph, they are faithful Jews, and every year they make the trek from Nazareth to Jerusalem. It's about 60 miles, maybe 75 miles, depending on which route they took and how far away and they lived. But it was a journey, and they would make that journey for Passover to celebrate. And Passover was like the celebration of the Jewish people. It celebrated the Exodus, being freed from the bondage of slavery. And in Jesus' ministry, he will confront the religious leaders. But Luke, the writer of this gospel, he is a Gentile. He has no ill intent toward Judaism. The people we've encountered so far, they're all faithful to the Torah. They are Jewish through and through, just as Jesus is Jewish. And so there's no sense in that Judaism has failed and we need a new religion. Like, there's none of that. It is, in fact, just the opposite. That Jesus, he is the fulfillment of the hopes and promises to Israel. And so Jesus and his family, they travel to Jerusalem, and they do that every year. And so on this account, Jesus is 12 years old. And this is 1 year before Jesus would have been officially an adult and accepted responsibility for fulfilling the law. Now you think, oh, 12-year-old, there's bar mitzvahs for Jewish boys. Not yet. Bar mitzvahs won't come along for another 500 years or so. But the family is there. It is that right at that age where you're becoming an adult, becoming a man. So the family participates in the festival, and then they head home, thinking that Jesus is with them. And it is a full day before they realize that Jesus is not with them. And this sounds a bit odd to us, but times were a little different. And so what you would have is these caravans of travelers, Jewish pilgrims making this pilgrimage together, and they were tight-knit families, tight-knit communities. So neighbors, and they're taking care of each other, they're watching out for one another, and traveling in a caravan, it just made it safer. It made it safer to travel. You were you had a bit more defense against bandits and thieves and robbers along the way. And so Mary and Joseph, they just assumed that Jesus was with their companions, especially, so if Jesus is approaching adulthood, at this point, he likely had other younger brothers and sisters who Mary and Joseph are trying to keep track of on this journey. So they travel the entire day, and then Jesus is missing. And they take the lost keys approach to following Jesus. You know what I'm talking about? Like when you lose your keys, what do? Where's the last place I had those keys? And they were thinking the same thing. Where's the last place we saw Jesus? Jerusalem. It's Jerusalem. And so they're worried. And Jerusalem, it's a city. And cities are dangerous. There are dark places. There are seedy people. There are thieves. There are traitors moving. It's not a place you want to leave your 12-year-old. And so they go back. They don't find him. And I wonder what Mary, what is she thinking? Is she like, oh man, I had one job to do. Don't lose the Son of God. How could I lose the Son of God? And what am I going to say to the angel Gabriel when he comes back to check in? Like, sorry. And what was her prayer? Well, like what that first prayer, like, our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. I lost your Son on earth. Is he up in heaven? Like what is the prayer? All right, that Jesus. I understand that my chronology is off. That prayer comes later. Okay, and Joseph as well. I mean, that is a rough day, and this should provide a measure of comfort to all parents everywhere. Like, there are no perfect parents. We aren't perfect. Mary and Joseph weren't perfect parents. We aren't perfect parents. And when we as parents fail, one of the best things that we can do for our children is to demonstrate the gospel to them and admit that we messed up. Admit that we are sinners, which is easier said than done. I'm not a fan. I guess I am a fan of of the gospel, but like personally, it's not easy to admit when we've messed up. Recently, our family, we were watching a TV show one evening, and one of the kids did something that just sent me over the edge. And I shut off the TV. I raised my voice slightly at the children. I sent them all to bed. Like, that's it, we're done. Everyone to bed. And it was a bit harsh. It was harsh. And after the kids had gone to bed, I asked the Lord. I was like, was I too harsh with the kids? And because I was trying to justify myself, like, that, you know. But Elora gently confirmed what I already knew, but did not want to admit. That I had overreacted, that I had been harsh with the kids. And so I was like, oh man. The next morning, I apologized to the child who had upset me and said that Daddy had been harsh, and that Daddy is a sinner and needs Jesus. Daddy needs Jesus too. And so we demonstrate the gospel to the kids, to our friends, to relationships we're in, when we confess that we've messed up, and we take ownership for that. So Mary and Joseph, they get back to Jerusalem, And they don't find Jesus right away. The text seems to indicate that it took them another day, like they're looking everywhere for Jesus. And I wonder what the conversation was like between Mary and Joseph, like during this 2 days where they can't find Jesus. Are they supportive of one another? Are they maybe blaming the other one? Like, I thought you said. Are there any "I told you so's"? I don't know. I'm just guessing what things might have been like. But finally, they find Jesus. And Jesus apparently was not where they expected him to be. He is in the temple. He is dialoguing with the teachers. He's listening. He's asking questions. And everyone is like, who is this kid? Who is this kid? It's the Passover season. So likely the discussion in the temple with the teachers of this time of year is going to be about the Passover, about the Exodus, and about the lamb. And what is ironic is that here you have Jesus, who is the Passover lamb, at Passover, talking about the Passover in the temple. Like all that is happening, and so it's a unique picture for us to see looking back at what is happening. And Luke 2:47 says, "Everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers." They were amazed at his understanding and his answers. Even as a 12-year-old, Jesus possesses a wisdom that the teachers don't quite understand, and they are amazed at Jesus. And I wonder, have you ever been amazed at Jesus? Can you remember a moment, or maybe there was a story or a realization, or there's something that produced amazement at who Jesus is? I remember I was 19. I was a freshman in college. It was spring break, and I traveled with a group of friends to southern Missouri. Crazy. I know, crazy spring break trip. But there was one of our friends lived there, and so a group, I think there was about a dozen of us, went and stayed there, and we did normal college spring break stuff. We went spelunking in this unmarked cave on this private property. We swam across this freezing cold like cow pasture little pond. We threw cow patties at the girls who were with us. And they say chivalry is dead. We did all like college things, but one evening, it was around Easter, around time of Passover that year, and we had a Seder meal to celebrate Passover and seeing Christ in the Passover. And then after that Seder meal, one of the classmates, one of my friends, picked up a guitar, begins playing. We have a time of worship and prayer, and I remember just ending up that evening lying on my face, lying on the ground, just seeking after Jesus, and it being a moment, years later, that I still remember, where I was overcome with amazement at who Jesus is and what he's done in my life, and committing my life to serving Jesus at even greater measure. So I wonder, do you have any experiences like that when you have been amazed at who Jesus is? Luke introduces Jesus as a young scholar. He's engaging in a theological discussion with his elders, with teachers in the temple, and his age, Jesus being 12, I think is not insignificant. And in fact, I think Luke may be trying to tell us something about the character, the quality of Jesus, that he is fit to be king. And the reason I say that is because there's other stories parallel at this time, in fact, just before Jesus by a few years, where Augustus, he is seen as a young prodigy. Like by the time of Jesus, Augustus is already Caesar. He is reigning as the emperor. But there was like stories of him growing up, of being raised with a fine education. In fact, and when Augustus was 12, when his grandmother passed away, he gives the funeral oration. Like he is the one who speaks at the funeral as a 12-year-old. And so it could be that Luke is showing his readers the qualities that Jesus possesses, that he is going to be someone extraordinary. In fact, someone who is going to rival Augustus, or rival Caesar, rival the empires of the world. And this isn't, well, that's a whole lot to say from just saying he's 12, Matthew. Like, I could see that being an argument. But this isn't the first reference or first parallel in the birth narratives to Caesar Augustus. Caesar is known as the Son of God. Multiple times already, Jesus has been called the Son of God. And so Jesus is the new promised Lord, appointed not by the Roman Senate, but by God. Jesus is the new Caesar. And so Jesus, he's sitting there with the teachers. Mary and Joseph find him, and Mary has all the feels as she sees Jesus. Verse 48 says, when his parents saw him, they were astonished. His mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been anxiously searching for you." Mary does what many parents have done in the moment when you think a child is lost, or they're hurt, or they've been in an accident, or something that maybe was their fault, where she's probably hugging and loving him and whipping him at the same time. You know, like she's happy to see him, but I can imagine her crying. And the text says that she and Joseph, they're astonished and anxious. Other translations say they were greatly distressed. Or the old King James says they were sorrowing. Like there was deep sorrow. One modern paraphrase, the Message, I like what it says. Mary, quoting Mary, it says that your father and I had been half out of our minds looking for you. Now, she doesn't know DMX's song Party Up, but she knows the heart of the lyrics. You know what I'm saying? Y'all gonna make me lose my mind, up in here, like that is a little creative liberty here in reading this, but I can just feel what Mary is feeling. And then Jesus, well, she says, "Son, why have you treated us like this?" And I'm sure there have been times where we have asked God, like, why have you treated me like this? Why did you let this happen to me? And Jesus' response is calm in comparison to Mary, because Mary is blurting out really an accusation. And it might be tinged with a mixture of guilt and relief that parents will recognize. Like she's asking Jesus a question, but is it really Jesus' fault that his parents left him? And that's how Jesus responds in verse 49. "Why were you searching for me?" he asked. "Didn't you know that I had to be in my Father's house?" These are the first recorded words of Jesus in the Bible. And from the very first, we see that Jesus is aware that he is God's son. And he makes it clear that the Father's business is his business. And so we begin to get this picture that Jesus is more than just a prophet, more than just a great teacher. He's more than an ethicist or a venerated religious figure. He is something else. He is claiming a different father, a different lineage. And if what he is saying is true, that he has a different father, that he is God's son, then how do we respond to him? How do we respond to his claims to be the Son of God? So at this point in the Gospel account, if you're just reading it for the first time, you probably don't have enough information to decide like what you're going to do with that claim. Like you haven't seen any of the miracles of Jesus. Obviously the death and resurrection haven't happened yet. But Luke's writing is superb, and he's creating a tension and suspense that's easy for us to miss because we know the whole story, but it's there. And so, and as we, just in a casual reading, it sounds a little bit like Jesus is being a bit unempathetic, right? Like, why were you looking for me? Why were you worried? I don't think Jesus was being dismissive or rude. And in fact, in the next verses, we see that Jesus submits to his parents. He goes with them, goes back to Nazareth with them. And so today's main point, it's for the kids. Here it is. If the Son of God obeyed his parents, kids should obey their parents too. I'll say it one more time. In fact, if you want to pause the video momentarily. Go gather your children around, sit them down, and here we go. If the Son of God obeyed his parents, kids should obey their parents too. That's actually not the main point of my teaching today or the main point of this passage, but it is true that Jesus obeyed his parents. And Jesus says, "Didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house?" And I think these words, there's more here than we just get on first glance. The first words recorded of Jesus, and there's a phrase that in the NIV, which is what I typically use to teach, doesn't capture, and a lot of modern translations don't capture. But there is the first occurrence that Jesus uses of this Greek word called day. And the translation for day is, "It is necessary." And so it's translated different ways, like "I had to" or "I must." And it's fine as far as the translation goes, but we might miss the significance of this word and of what Jesus is saying. So he uses this phrase throughout his ministry. So just a couple of examples here I'll give you. So Luke chapter 9, Luke chapter 22, and in each case, the word indicates that Jesus is fulfilling something unique, something specific about who the Messiah is. So in Luke 9:22, he says, "The Son of Man must suffer many things. It is necessary that the Son of Man suffer and be rejected. He must be killed on the third day and be raised to life." Like there was something about what it means to be the Messiah. It is necessary. Luke 22, "And he was numbered with the transgressors, and I tell you that this must be fulfilled in me." It is necessary for Jesus to be about his Father's business. He is compelled. He knows his calling from an early age. He knows his mission. Mary and Joseph don't understand it yet. And that's what it says in verse 20. They did not understand what he was saying to them. Then he went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them. But his mother treasured all these things in her heart. Mary and Joseph, they don't know what to think about Jesus' response. They don't realize that Jesus is making a distinction between his heavenly Father, God the Father, and his earthly Father. And so they're struggling to comprehend. But Mary's taking it all in. Just as Gigi looked at a few weeks ago, she is treasuring these things in her heart. And Mary and Joseph, in this day, they encounter Jesus in a new way, and there is surprise. And I imagine that Luke wants us to encounter Jesus in the same way. The same way as the teachers in the temple, in the same way as Mary and Joseph, for there to be some surprise and to be some amazement, some astonishment at who Jesus is. And Luke is inviting us on a journey of discovery. He's inviting us to ponder who this child is. And that's my invitation to you and to me as we continue this series through the Gospel of Luke. That as we encounter Jesus, there's going to be surprises along the way. There's going to be things that Jesus says that we don't understand. But I think the invitation is to pursue Jesus. And I believe that Jesus will reveal himself to us as we go. I want to conclude with a quote from one of the most prominent theologians of the 21st century. His name is Tom Wright. And here's what he says about this passage and his takeaway, is that finding Jesus will normally involve a surprise. Jesus doesn't do or say what Mary and Joseph were expecting. It will be like that with us too. Every time we relax and think we've really understood him, he will be up ahead, or perhaps staying behind while we go on without thinking. Discipleship always involves the unexpected. We may want to reflect on whether we have taken Jesus himself for granted. If Mary and Joseph could do it, there is every reason to suppose that we can too. We mustn't assume he is accompanying us as we go off on our own business. But if and when we sense the lack of his presence, we must be prepared to search for him in prayer, in the scriptures, in the sacraments, and not to give up until we find him again. So would you seek Jesus with us? Would you continue on this journey as we try to follow Jesus, love our neighbors, be an economically and racially diverse church, all doing that as we follow Jesus together? Grace and peace.